G'day, May 40 here. So you're hearing a lot of discussion about Joe Rogan and the Joe Rogan voter and how can the Democrats win back the Joe Rogan voter. And we have one Substack newsletter arguing if the Democrats want to win, they need to regain the Rogan vote. Joe Rogan is just a normal dude, one who happens to be famous and influential. If you treat him as the enemy, you treat America as the enemy. And Glenn, who writes competing Substack United States of Exception, he says, I disagree. Democrats are perfectly capable of winning without non-college educated, culturally right-leaning men, as long as it's otherwise a good year. They did it in 2018 and 2020. They came close this year. The question is, do you want to win more often by including people in your coalition who are prone to conspiracy theories and right-wing cultural causes, which means you have to focus more on the stupid things that they care about? Or do you want to win less often, but with a smarter electorate that lets you do the things that you want to do? So far, the Democrats have opted for the latter. I don't see an obvious reason why that's a worse choice. That's a really good challenge, right? Donald Trump has won in part by appealing to losers, by appealing to the conspiracy crowd, people who are losing out life, right? People who are earning less than $100,000 a year. They're far more likely to vote for the Republicans than for the Democrats. People who earn over $100,000 a year are more likely to vote for the Democrats. Over 100,000 Democrats, under 100,000 Republicans. So Joe Rogan is the least remarkable person on the internet, right? He's just an average guy. He doesn't have a coherent worldview. He's not very smart. He's conspiratorial across the board. He's sympathetic to all sorts of conspiracy theories. He believes the moon landing is faked, that vaccines are bad. He doesn't think hard about things. He just talks to people, comes away with impressions. He's not particularly political. Doesn't have a coherent political ideology. He's anti-establishment. He's economically populist, but he supports action on climate change. His views are not stable over the time. When he's talking to a Democrat, he sounds like a Democrat. While he's talking to a Republican, sounds like a Republican. He supports both Trump and Bernie, so he's anti-establishment and populist. He also likes Tulsi Gabbard and most of the other anti-establishment candidates. So he's just all over the map. He doesn't think coherently. He doesn't think very hard. And Donald Trump won by appealing to people like this. And here's an example of someone who was diagnosed with generalized social anxiety disorder. He served in the military for about 20 years, became disillusioned with the military, became disillusioned with church, became disillusioned with almost every institution in American life. He never married. He is not able to sustain friendships. And so this feeds into a certain conspiratorial worldview that our institutions and the world is at fault. The world is corrupt, and the world is corrupt, but I'm corrupt and you're corrupt, right? Nobody is immune from corruption. I played this guy yesterday.
From the corrupt government, how these churches and how corrupt they can be, and how they take advantage of people, and they're taking money from folks, and how it's just become so secular in the church now, and it's rock bands and skinny jeans and big screens, and there's hardly any type of true biblical practices going on. Is it really about conforming to the likeness of Christ and all of that? And it just seems like it's just a club in a big community center, and I've just got what's the word, disenchanted or discontented with the modern day church, so I don't attend them anymore. And then now hearing and listening to other YouTube channels, it's possible that Jesus may have been a made-up character. That rocked my world. I'm like, what? How could that be? And it does make you wonder when you read the literature and you listen to the videos. It very well could possibly be that Jesus Christ was made up, and the Bible is myth and allegory, stories. And so that rattles you when you've based your life on the Christian faith. And so that's something that I'm now struggling with. My goodness, is this just a well-written book now? Even though I think the Bible is still a great book. And the 10 Commandments alone, my gosh, just think if we just followed those.
So people usually choose their sex life and then choose their religion. So if you're married with kids, right, you've chosen that kind of sex life, a monogamous life committed to building a family, right, you're much more likely to be religious. If you're not married, then it becomes harder and harder as you age to stay within an organized religion because you are the oddball.
So in years recent, my whole world has been flipped upside down in what to believe. And I know as I sit here in this park and I'm hearing these birds and I see the sky and the grass and the trees, I know this just didn't happen on its own.
Yeah, we adjust our beliefs to fit our life situation. So if you're losing at life, you're going to want to blame other parties, other institutions. If you're doing well at life, you're going to want to protect those institutions. You want to protect the existing order. So if you believe that smoking is bad and yet you can't quit smoking, right, you will either quit smoking or you will give up your belief that smoking is bad. It verges on the impossible to maintain your beliefs while you fail to live up to them.
I mean, it's just, I mean, it's beautiful. And then there's a river right over here. And so something tells me this was divinely created. So I have to say, I still believe in a creator. And, but I just wonder sometimes, is what we were taught really the true story? And then just because we don't believe.
Remember, you find out one thing on YouTube or on the internet that blows your mind, whether it's about the Jews or about race differences or about Muslims or homosexuals, and then you realize that you've been lied to, and then you start questioning everything.
Believe a certain way, or you have people that are Hindu, and some of my best neighbors were non-Christian. They were Indian, and practiced, you know, their faith, and gosh, you know, Buddhists and all of that. And to say that that if they don't put their faith and trust in Christ, like the Bible teaches, that those folks are going to go to hell and burn for all eternity. I tell you.
So if he was busy with a wife and kids, right, he wouldn't have time or inclination to question these things.
I used to believe that, and it scared the crap out of me. And so I have to question that. Is there really a place where a lake of fire where you burn for all eternity? So it's
you basically have to be single and somewhat isolated to have the time and the inclination to reevaluate all these fundamental beliefs that otherwise you would just take for granted because you just inherit them from your community. They are like the water that you swim in.
Struggle right now. It's an absolute struggle right now for me, where I'm just questioning everything. And you know, you're learning about the pharmaceutical industry and how it's about profits, the medical industry.
Right, he's learning all this on YouTube. He doesn't mention books, right? He's learning all these things from watching YouTube videos. YouTube videos should be the beginning of your search for truth. They should not be how you conclude truth. Right? You've got bad epistemics, bro.
Industry, you look at how it's the system is set up to keep Americans sick. And
right,
look
he
at us
sounds
in
like
America,
a Kennedy.
how fat we are and sick
Kennedy
we are,
voter.
and the cancers and it is huge business. And then the military, and here I am, a military man, learning and realizing now after I reflect on it, war is a big racket. General Smedley Butler, I think World War I time frame, General wrote a book about it. War is a racket, and it really is. As General Eisenhower said, the military-industrial complex, and I was a part of that. Joined the military with this hoorah patriotism, red, white, and blue, U.S. flag waving, serve my country. And then realizing, and then you look at Afghanistan, I saw it firsthand. What a mess. And we spent all that time, spent all that money, and then you have to ask, for what?
I'm not arguing with his conclusions. I have so many friends who've been on a similar journey. I'm just pointing out that this type of thinking is what happens when you have a lot of time alone to think and you become disconnected from communal pressures and the pressures of raising a family.
And now I know why my father didn't want me to join the military. He was the Vietnam War era. But he was later, he passed away in 2020. And that's when and then that COVID hit, and then we were locked down, and then I inherited the home and decided to remodel the house, and that's when I started discovering the YouTube videos. But he was proud of me on what I was able to accomplish in the military, so it's nothing to sneeze at, for sure. And I took advantage of all the opportunities and got out of there unscathed, you know. But if I had it over to do...
He discovered the YouTube videos. My God, YouTube is great, but it's a terrible way to reach conclusions.
Again, I don't think I would have chosen that path knowing what I know now. And so I guess that's just something to share. Maybe there's people out there that are my age or maybe even younger that are in this position where it's like, wow, you know, you're learning things about yourself. You learn that you were a nice guy. You know, you realize now where you've gone wrong. And here's the other thing I learned recent: social anxiety disorder. And I looked that up, and I was watching a video on that, and I think I exhibited some of that, and still in some ways do. But I've done well to overcome it, and I can get out in front of people. I can talk to people. I trained people in the Army. I taught classes and gave briefings and PowerPoint slides, and so I'm capable of doing it. I wasn't necessarily comfortable doing it, but I did it. And so I think that was a part of it. You know, even to this day, I don't really have much of a social life. I don't really have close friends. Let's just come right out and say it. Jim, do you really have a close friend?
It's so much harder to change your fundamental beliefs when you have close friends, because other people are going to get disturbed when you make radical changes like this. Right? He gets to go on this journey, and Kip gets to go on his journey, and I get to go on my journey because, to a degree, I'm disconnected from other people. I don't have normal family responsibilities.
No. I have acquaintances. I have my neighbors where I live. They help me. I help them. But a true, genuine friend, no. I used to belong to groups. I used to volunteer. I used to belong to what was called the Lions Club. And I'm no longer a part of that. Someone was passing through there. But I think the social anxiety was something I recently discovered in myself. I didn't know. I thought something was wrong with me. I really did. Why is it that I am more comfortable on my own, by myself? And so I don't like, you know, people, I guess, getting too close to me. I'm not one of those guys that invites people over to the house and we have a barbecue and all that. I'd always go to other people's houses for get-togethers, but I never did them myself. And I always thought there was something wrong with me, why I didn't have a social life. Still don't really have a real social life. Don't have friends. Currently no girlfriend.
There is something wrong with you. As you mentioned, you have social anxiety disorder.
And so it does get lonely. Some would assume that I'm gay. I'm not gay. I'm not that. And no, I like women just like, you know, the next guy. So it's not that at all. And so, yeah, you do feel lonely. You do have needs that go unmet. And so, and then you want to get into a relationship in the U.S., but then you realize the way the divorce rates are, the way the system is set up, it makes you want to take a step back and say, you know what? I may get into a relationship in the U.S., but I'm sure as heck not going to get married. Is it too late for me? No. And I've been watching content creators living abroad in Southeast Asia and other places around the world that have left the U.S. They're expats and have found success in dating. They've got folks that are in the Philippines and finding what they say more fit, feminine, and friendly women in those cultures. They're more traditional in some of these places.
Okay, I just thought he was highly articulate about a common direction where you become more isolated, you have more time on your own, and you start questioning everything. You watch a lot of YouTube videos, and you end up becoming a YouTube creator. All right, this is Mark Halperin this evening.
Complicated because Donald Trump will hand out jobs to people.
Right, it's like the Hunger Games. That's what's going on at Mar a Lago right now.
Multiple people, same job. And he'll also ask a lot of people, you know, on the patio, what do you think of this person? What do you think of that person? And he loves the pageantry. Now, they have got him to not do the parade through the Trump Tower lobby as they did 8 years ago. That's a big difference. But what's happening behind the scenes is very similar. And again, you have people at the highest levels accusing other people at the highest levels of engaging in negative attacks, sometimes personal, sometimes not. And there's all sorts of people in Trump world who have influence. when people talk about Bill Clinton or Barack Obama or George W. Bush, the circle of influence is, most expansively 20 people with real influence. Donald Trump, the circles, my sense is it's much bigger. It's much bigger. And that means if you're trying to get a job, you can't rely on the two people running the transition or Susie Wiles saying, yep, you should feel good about your chances. Because Steve Bannon, Roger Stone, Don Jr., J.D. Vance, Elon Musk, Charlie Kirk, Bobby Kennedy, Tulsi Gabbard, there's any number of people who could run into the president or call the president-elect and say, oh, I don't like that person. It's incredible, the stories I'm hearing, a lot of which I can't share, but the general flavor of it is really brutal. And give you one example of the dynamic. A lot of people in Washington on Capitol Hill and lobbyists are greatly interested in who's going to get which jobs. They look at this with an extremely jaundiced and sophisticated eye. So last night it was reported, and then today again by other news organizations, first by CNN, that Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota, is going to be the head of the Department of Homeland Security. It's not clear to most of my sources why she would get that job. why she...
Right. There are all sorts of announcements, but not necessarily everything that we're being told is accurate. And so one has to employ some skepticism when we get these announcements.
Who think being in the cabinet is the best way to be positioned to run for president in 4 years, or to be J.D. Vance's running mate in 4 years if he ends up being the nominee. That's a subtext to this whole thing. Now, there were, as I said, some nominations or appointments made today. Go ahead and just start putting up photos and we'll talk about them. One person, John Radcliffe, who I forecast, I think, on the morning meeting yesterday was going to get a big job, is going to be the head of the CIA, former House member, and a guy with a lot of experience in national security, as with Congressman Waltz from Florida, who's going to be the head of the NSC. These are two guys with a lot of credibility, a lot of credentials in the national security field. Again, not a surprise that he's getting a big job. Next, Bill McGinley is going to be the White House counsel. Important job. He's been a Republican lawyer. He served as a cabinet secretary in Trump 1. Again, a MAGA loyalist through and through with a lot of legal credentials. Not a surprise. As we said, Kristi Noem, again, not formally nominated today or announced today. It'll be interesting to see if she doesn't get it. It'll be an interesting case study. The pace of appointments continues to be quite quick by normal standards. I don't have that down in hard numbers, but just my based on my recollection. And the policy formation continues to be very big. Now we've seen, with the exception of
okay, the point is that we could get a far more radical transformation of the United States government in the next few months than we have seen in many decades. The first Trump term was not a radical transformation of government. Right? Forget all the talk about this person here and that person there. The point is we are on the cusp of a radical transformation of government.
The Pentagon secretary, we've seen a lot of the national security team named. The economic team remains largely unnamed. Head of the National Economic Council, head of commerce, head of treasury, those all remain unfilled. And there's, in MAGA world, a desire to make sure that those positions don't go to establishment types. But Donald Trump has chosen in his national security package team a balance between people with establishment credentials and MAGA foreign policy positions in the same people. In other words, it's not one of each, like a Noah's Ark thing. It's really people like Marco Rubio, previously more establishment, now more MAGA in their foreign policy positions. Some Washington insiders interpreting Mar Lago, they may be wrong, see a national security team that's a little more MAGA, balanced by an economic team that maybe is a little bit more traditional establishment, center right as opposed to MAGA right. And part of that is style and tone and stray statements. Part of it is about tariffs. But it's also about this question of how fundamental will the changes sought be in the balance of power between Congress and the White House, in changing the nature of the federal government. The indications we're getting to abolish the Department of Education, really big overhaul of the UN, big overhaul of the Pentagon. If you look at all the Republican presidents since Reagan, including Reagan, Bush 1, Bush 2, were never going to be bulldozers of the establishment. They just weren't. Bush 43 looked for some change, no doubt, but he was not a bulldozer against the establishment. Reagan talked that way, but he had a Democratic-controlled House and some of the time a Democratic-controlled Senate, and did not really follow through on this rhetoric of fundamental change. Trump won, did some things along those lines, but really, if you kind of tally it up, and of course COVID intervened, but if you tally it up, there wasn't a ton of fundamental change. There was changes in the tax code, changes in energy policy, changes in regulation, but not a fundamental remaking of what people in MAGA land would call a deep state, of the culture, of the liberal culture, moving vast numbers of federal employees out of Washington. For all of the talk of Project 2025, which Donald Trump did not write or own, but the Democrats tried to make the big campaign issue of it, there is a desire to fundamentally change things.
So I was hoping Elbridge Colby would become the national security advisor. He is a restrainer. He wants America to focus on its number one strategic rival, China, and to pull our forces out of Europe and the Middle East. And he was on Tucker Carlson yesterday.
Ukraine we didn't achieve them and we can't. Zelensky immediately comes out upon Trump's election and says, actually, I'm for peace. That does maybe seem like it's winding down. Oh, who knows?
I hope. Yeah.
But the noises are consistent with winding down.
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, the very people who are pushing that war all of a sudden like very excited about a war with Iran.
Yeah.
It's like they just seamlessly move. It's like, oh, Ukraine, whatever. Actually, the real problem is Iran, and telling us that Iran's trying to murder President Trump, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know what's true. I don't. But how would the United States, what would happen if we went to war with Iran?
Well, I mean, I think, look, Iran's a bad regime. We don't want to have a nuclear weapon. We don't want to support Israel. We don't want to be able to support groups attacking Israel, et cetera, et cetera. But like, haven't we learned the lesson over the last 25 years about the ill-advised nature of very significant conflicts in the Middle East that don't?
So Israel badly wants to get the United States into a major war with Iran. And Bibi Netanyahu is doing everything he can to bring the United States in, to just start bombing the heck out of Iran. And Iran, of course, would retaliate. Iran, I'm sure, has all sorts of hit squads in the United States. Right? They could slaughter hundreds of Americans in retaliation. Right? It would be at a major cost in American lives, talking thousands of people, if we start bombing Iran.
Have clear goals and clear connection to American interests. Like, haven't we been over? Like, didn't we run this experiment a couple times? And it's often the exact same people calling for war with Iran who were involved in the past. And it's like, shouldn't there be some degree of accountability? Moreover, it's like a bad idea in itself. I mean, like I was criticized in The Bulwark by Eric Edelman, who is Dick Cheney's advisor and number 3 at the Pentagon under Bush. He said my ideas were iconoclastic. And I was like, thank you. I'm delighted that you think my ideas are iconoclastic.
But how could Eric Edelman be writing with any credibility at all on foreign policy questions after being intimately involved in the Iraq war and then never apologizing? I don't know. There should be some international authority that requires contrition, like a moral UN where you don't get to say another word.
There's a great tweet I saw about The Atlantic magazine. It's kind of funny that The Atlantic's position is both Trump is Hitler and we want him to wage more wars.
Until you don ashes and sackcloth and apologize.
I mean, who among us isn't? I'm certainly not inerrant. I'm certainly not infallible. But like, at least show some. It's like Paul Gigot of the Wall Street Journal a year ago gave a speech to AEI, treated the Iraq War as like a mulligan. It's like I think that's like a big deal. And obviously a lot of people got to had different views, etc. But it's like it's kind of show the contrition, show the penance, show the learning. And so that I think is the other thing though, Tucker, is like it's the same people who are calling for attacking Iran who are also calling for escalating the war in Ukraine or even a no-fly zone, recognizing an independent Taiwan, or getting in a war with China, or attacking North Korea. It's like if we do all those things, we know objectively as a fact that our military is not capable of fighting more than one major war at a time. So even if you did want to, getting in multiple fights with people at the same time is just like foolhardy. And I mean, but the way I think about it is the Washington blob establishment can get us into wars and crises, but they can't fix the problem. So
Right.
it's really important right now. And it seems to me that, just listening to President Trump and his historic victory, the decisive mandate he got, his leadership, his mandate, his agenda for peace from a position of strength, use the military sparingly, but have it be strong. It's really important not to get.
So disappointed that he did not become the Trump national security advisor. Maybe he will down the line. All right, speaking of neocons, right, let's get the neocon perspective here from the Commentary Magazine
with
crew.
the Biden administration's and its failures, we may be in a different place with it.
I agree with that, and I would just add, I'm thinking a lot of Nixon in 69, right? Nixon's elected in 68, saying that he is going to end the war in Vietnam. Right?
He has a secret plan.
Peace with honor is how it eventually becomes. I think Trump is in a similar position vis-a-vis Ukraine today. He wants the war to end. Trump doesn't like war. We know that. He ran as the peace candidate now for 2 elections. But in order to achieve a settlement, just like Nixon, you may have to escalate to de-escalate, right? If Putin is not forthcoming at first, that means with the team that Trump has, maybe we're a little bit.
All right, so these are blokes who are generally never Trump. All right, they are conservatives at Commentary Magazine, but they're not normal conservatives. They are neoconservatives. They want a highly activist, highly interventionist American foreign policy, primarily for the purpose of keeping Israel safe. And they really, really, really want the United States to bomb Iran.
Bit tougher to show that he does need to recognize that he's not going to get everything he wants. So I would look through what's going to happen in Ukraine through the similar prism. That Nixon's goal was always to extract the United States from Vietnam, but in order to do that, of course, we had things like the Christmas Day bombing and the Cambodia, very controversial operations that eventually did produce Nixon's desired outcome.
And that also informs what we think about the Hawks as well, and who he's hired in the whole neocon debate too, right? Because he wants an end to wars, and that doesn't mean, but he knows that doesn't mean that you just send a diplomat and have the.
Right. How do you end these wars? All right. We got into disastrous wars in the Middle East, which would not have occurred, I believe, if Trump had been president. Putin would not have invaded Ukraine. Hamas would not have invaded Israel. We wouldn't have these 2 major conflagrations. But how do you end them? The Biden model is to have the Biden administration try to micromanage these conflicts, and lots of talking, lots of negotiation, lots of diplomacy. We can just talk our way to some kind of mutual solution. So war comes down to who will rule a particular piece of territory, right? That's the upshot of war. And the Biden administration plan is we can just talk to everyone, and through the power of reason, we can come to reasonable conclusions. But people are not primarily reasonable. People are primarily driven by their genetics and by their tribe. And so the Trump administration recognizes that traditional diplomacy and just talk is not necessarily going to get it done. That talking and diplomacy and a deal comes after you have facts on the ground already established, when it becomes clear who will rule a particular piece of territory. And when basically all sides agree on who will rule a particular piece of territory, then you have the basis for a peace. You're not going to talk your way there if the facts on the ground are not conducive to peace.
Them talk and then come back in a week and have them talk again. In Trump's first administration, they did this outreach to the Palestinians with a sort of economic peace style deal, whatever. Palestinians said, "No, I don't like it," and they said, "Okay, well, moving on. We're going to go to Riyadh. We're going to touch the
orb,
the sphere,
orb,
or whatever,
the orb, the glowing orb."
Right. Mahmoud Abbas, you missed your chance to touch the orb, but I have. I'm going to touch the orb with somebody. I'll go to the orb with someone else. And then, we had the Abraham Accords type of negotiations come out of that, which was like let's just talk about how we can make this situation strategically better in the Middle East without giving the Palestinians a veto. You can miss your turn when it comes to Trump. He moves on. And so that is, part of the renting of garments over Marco Rubio being Secretary of State is this belief that people have convinced themselves that these supposed neocons just want war itself and that war to go on forever. But the whole point of what Trump is doing is that the previous administration's policy was war forever. It doesn't matter what the intent is. The point is that, practically speaking, in the real world, the effect of it was ongoing war. Trump is bringing in people to end that.
You've just said something incredibly important in 2 realms. and Abe evoked this in talking about what the Ukrainians said. The war between Russia and Ukraine has lengthened and deepened and become more of a kind of trench World War I situation because the United States supplied enough materials and enough help to help Ukraine reach a stalemate. And in Israel, and with the war in Gaza, Biden was on Israel's side and said all the right things and supplied them with weapons and then said, you're killing too many Palestinians, you're not letting enough food aid in, you know, the maps say you shouldn't go into Rafah, and extended the war through its policies by another 6 months. Now it looks like it really is coming to an end. There's an offensive the Israelis are conducting in Jabalia in the north of Gaza. 1,000 Hamasniks surrendered yesterday. They killed another couple thousand. They are giving up, it would appear. And what happened was there was a point at which Israel said, we cannot be handcuffed like this. And we do have enough to do what we have to do. And we're going to just have to suffer the slings and arrows of this finger wagging. But the Biden administration, which also wanted to be a non-war administration, pulls us out of Afghanistan, all of that, has ended up extending and making immensely worse both of these wars that Israel and Ukraine have fought.
Right. The more they've tried to micromanage these wars, right, the more of a mess the Biden administration has created.
So the de-escalate to de-escalate is a classic war strategy. Like, that's what Israel is doing now in a weird way with Hezbollah and with Iran, which is they're saying, FAFO, like don't think that we're not able to make your existence impossible. So,
and I would just observe
cut it out.
The third Iranian attack on Israel has not yet happened.
Right.
And even in the days before the election, it seemed that the Ayatollah had directed his forces to prepare for such an attack. But since Trump's election, it has not happened. That doesn't mean that it won't happen in the coming weeks, but it hasn't. And here is another way in which Trump resembles Nixon, because Nixon, of course, really loved the madman theory of foreign relations, where you got all of your enemies confused and uncertain because they didn't know what the crazy Nixon would do. And
who evoked that?
Things the same way.
And who evoked that? Literally
Trump
talking
himself,
about John Bolton.
Yeah.
He said, that guy is an idiot, and I didn't like him, and he was, but they thought he was crazy. And so he was very useful to me because he was standing at my side, and they all thought he wanted to start World War III, and that gave me some leverage with them.
Right.
Well, that was a very...
Trump said about his own relationship with Xi Jinping.
Yeah.
Because he said in the final weeks of the campaign something like, he doesn't know what the heck I'm going to do. Right.
Well, he will bookend the weakness is provocation of the Biden term with chaos is strategy, perhaps. I do worry. I wonder. I mean, one of the things that's interesting, and this applies both to domestic policy and foreign policy, is the disarray on the left right now and how they're trying to formulate response. Because one thing that's interesting about this conversation is that we're talking about Trump like a regular president. And the whole conceit on the left is that he is not a regular person. He's not a regular leader. He's a fascist. And we've gone through all these things. But if they choose to cover him as an exception to the rule, they're going to miss a lot of what got him reelected in the first place. And I think that's especially true on foreign policy because they've been extremely dishonest, the mainstream media, in their coverage of the failures of the Biden administration on foreign policy. And I think I fear they're going to evoke the World War III chaos agent thing that they did in the first term, and they're going to be wrong. And they're going to miss what a lot of Americans see about this, which isn't we're going isolationist, white supremacist, fascist, but that people are sick and tired of certain aspects of the way America's conducted itself abroad. And he might pull back on some of those. We might not like it, but
Americans are tired of the forever wars. And this gets virtually no coverage in the mainstream media. The notion that America should be highly skeptical about getting into any more forever wars, all right, doesn't get much respect from the mainstream media. It doesn't get long, thoughtful pieces in the New York Times or in Foreign Affairs magazine. So will neocons take over Trump's new administration? Good discussion here.
Like you said, Kelly, all this could change by the time that people are actually watching this. They're changing minute to minute. Those of us who've been around long enough, who have ever applied the anti-war or restraint label to ourselves, think about the fact that the conservative red meat right, the thing that makes them the maddest right now with these picks is if he picks warmongers. Boy, what a wonderful place to be in compared to the Bush-Cheney era in the right. So I just wanted to say that up front. As for what's going on right now, I think when names are floated, neoconservative adjacent or full-blown neocons or whatever you want to call them, that we don't like, we need to raise hell. I think that's what happened in the case of Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo, that a lot of pushback by Trump's most avid supporters and advocates and allies saying we don't want these people led to him saying, and I hope he keeps his promise, they won't be in our administration. As far as like Marco Rubio possibly being Secretary of State, which I think is an absolutely horrible idea, I have three thoughts actually. First of all, Marco Rubio is an awful neoconservative champion. The reason he ran for president in 2016 was to be that. He even had people like Lindsey Graham getting in the race to take down Rand Paul to make it easier for Marco Rubio. Of course, Trump trampled everybody, and it was a different story. Another thing is, this Rubio, as bad as he is, the same guy as he was in 2011. I think, like Tom Cotton, he kind of doesn't want to be at least branded as neocon as he wants.
So Tucker Carlson is very much on the restrainer category. And the Commentary Magazine crew here is the opposite of that. So
that was, they just want war in the Middle East for Israel. Now you've the people who were saying no neocons. They're pro-Israel. They want to back Israel to the hilt, and they're all
yeah, but not Dave,
about two different groups.
Yeah, there's two different groups because Dave Smith, comic Dave Smith, who is as funny as a heart attack, is very anti-Israel.
And Tucker doesn't want us to do anything against Iran.
Right. So, and of course, Tucker is now explicitly pro-Russian. I don't know if you know this, but they have just a beautiful subway system. It's really beautiful.
Okay, well, neocons take over the new administration.
Was maybe I'm being optimistic. Number three, when Donald Trump was hating John Bolton was out of his administration, Donald Trump running in this election, he would still say, I got this weird mustache war dog behind me. I'm going to scare you, Iran. I'm going to scare you. He would always say that, like he needed that bulldog. And does he see that in Rubio? But he's actually not going to do what Rubio might like. I don't know. There's a lot to work with there.
Look, if we have Rubio as our Secretary of State, maybe there'll be some killer phone parties. Have you ever been to a killer phone party? I really want to know what goes on. How much diplomacy, international or domestic, occurs at a good phone party?
But I'm optimistic in general about what might happen, what we have to work with. And when we see things or hear things that we don't like, we need to speak out.
Okay, Dan, you want to respond to that? How are you feeling?
Not encouraged. I got to say, I would have hoped to see some, restrainer top people that were in line with what President Trump ran on and what got him elected and why people voted for him and continued to support, rather than seeing all these people come out with, that are either neocon or neocon leaning proclivities. And I'm certainly not encouraged by, some of the things that these people who have been put up for these positions have said in the past. It's not encouraging at all. Now, I have talked to some folks who are intimately involved in the transition process from the inside in Mar Lago, and they tell me, don't worry, there's some good restrainer picks still to come. We haven't seen anything. Who knows? Maybe Tulsi Gabbard is going to get Secretary of Defense or something. I think that would be a fantastic decision. Or even to see Trump reverse this idea of Pompeo at Secretary of State, because I think that's the best fit would be Tulsi Gabbard at that position. I'd love to see it. And if we get something like that, someone of her caliber in a key position, that'll help a whole lot. But so far, that's just been speculation, rumor. We haven't heard any good names so far, and I'm holding my breath.
Yeah, I mean, going back to what you were saying, Jack, I mean, I'd like to be optimistic as well. And I've noticed the shift in Marco Rubio over time. But my gut is that he is a shapeshifter. And when he realized that Trump was gaining traction for criticizing the Iraq war, suddenly he was against the Iraq war. I was doing a little Googling this morning. And he, when asked about whether or not he would still invade Iraq, knowing what we know now, if he knew then, he changed his tune and said that no, based on what we know now, I would not have invaded. And it was during that 2016 time when there was a sense on the right that these wars had failed and we needed a better strategy. And Donald Trump was tapping into that. And then after 2016, when you had this sort of realignment and Republicans were starting to talk about more restraint, more of a Jacksonian foreign policy, carry a big stick, walk softly or whatever that is. He and people like Tom Cotton even had sort of changed the way they talked about foreign policy. It wasn't about changing hearts and minds and spreading democracy and making the world safer for democracy. It was more about, well, we just got to show deterrence and we have to be tough, but we need to start looking inward. And he started using the language of the national conservatives. So my concern is that we give him more credit for shifting away when I feel like he puts his finger up to the wind and gets a sense of where the political conversation is going. And to back that theory up, I look at how he's been talking about Iran and Israel all along. He's been a hawk on Iran and Israel. And for the past year, he's been a staunch supporter of Israel, whatever it takes, whether it be in Lebanon, whether it be Gaza, and has been open to bombing Iran in the past over their nuclear program. He has been very close to Sheldon Adelson and Miriam Adelson, the billionaire donors who are uber Israel, like very right-wing Likudniks. And from his 2016 run into today, he's been very close to that faction of the Israel government. So I'd like to be hopeful, but my concern is that we have this open conflict going on in the Middle East right now, and between Rubio and Elise Stefanik as UN ambassador, who is also very anti-Iran, that this might.
So I was looking at Robert Wright's Non-Zero newsletter. He is a restrainer, but from the left side of the political spectrum. And his newsletter says, will Trump's election unleash Bibi, the president-elect, says he doesn't want a new war in the Middle East, but what he wants may not matter. Right. So there are two big reasons for Netanyahu's enthusiasm. He wants to get back into Trump's good graces. He also sees Trump as the key to further escalation in the Middle East. So Netanyahu has been biding his time in hopes that Trump will win the election. He's prepared an orderly and detailed plan for going after Iran's nuclear program following Trump's re-election. Right, it's time for total victory, Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir said Wednesday. So why are Israeli officials so enthusiastic about Trump's return? Right? So maybe that Trump may not want to start a war with Iran, but many of his newly appointed foreign policy team certainly do. So it's not hard to understand why Israeli officials see a difference between the long leash that they got from Biden and the blank check that they hope to get from Donald Trump.
This might be signaling what our posture will be going forward under the Trump administration. I know also that before we got on this show, there was another announcement that Governor Mike Huckabee has been tapped to be the U.S. ambassador to Israel. Now, he doesn't have a huge amount of foreign policy experience as a governor, but he is a staunch evangelical conservative, a very pro-Israel. So that gives you the sense of, again, of how that policy might shape up. But, Jack, I've seen, and you noted this to me offline, that there is a big movement online taking advantage of the social media machinery that Elon Musk has sort of been able to provide for this particular election. People are a lot more vocal about keeping some of these neocons out of the government. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of the real pushback among that part of Trump's base?
Sure. So many people are attributing Trump's victory to him going outside of legacy media and doing shows like Joe Rogan and Theo Vaughn. He went on the Undertaker's podcast, which I thought was awesome. He did all that stuff. And there was a bunch of names I'm leaving out, but podcasts with audiences larger than what CNN or even Fox News, if you're looking at Joe Rogan, get. A lot of young men, and that's the voters he was going after. He did that because a 27-year-old staffer and his son Barron thought it was a good idea. That's how organic that decision was.
Yeah.
Well, he's there. He pays.
Unfortunately, that same 27-year-old staffer who did have some great ideas also had a terrible idea of booking that insult comic to Trump's rally at Madison Square Garden.
Attention, and those are the people in X and on these programs. Dave Smith was on Joe Rogan saying, Mike Pompeo would be a horrible idea, and millions of people saw that. Trump pays attention to that. And if he doesn't, his son Barron's like, Dad, come check this out. But that's where we're at. So there's a power in that. And Kelly, everything you said about Marco Rubio, I completely agree with. I and Rand Paul talk on the phone, and Tucker Carlson, and people who are sort of in the orbit that know maybe Pompeo's not a good idea. Maybe I would be shocked to learn that Elon Musk and Tucker Carlson would say, maybe Mike Pompeo and Nikki Haley are a bad idea. You see what I'm saying? So that's why I'm a little more optimistic. I do know for a fact, I wrote this for the American Conservative, I guess that would have been 2017, when Trump was on the brink of bombing Iran and didn't at the last minute.
Oh, yeah.
He had talked to Rand Paul a little bit during that time, but the last person he talked to was Tucker, who, my understanding, I wrote this for the American Conservative at the time, and Politico reported this. I didn't just pull it out of thin air or hearsay, that Tucker basically said, remember when you ran on not repeating the Iraq war? Well, you might be about to do that again if you bomb Iran, and he stopped. That worries about civilian casualties. So that was him just a couple of years ago, with all these people around him now that know better. So as depressed or down as we get when we see these bad picks, and we should speak out, do remember that different context. I think it matters.
Okay, let's get a little bit more here from Mark Halperin's perspective.
And the people coming in are coming in with a president-elect who is 4 years wiser. And we've talked about this a little bit, but the more I think about it, the more important it seems. A normal two-term president in his second term is exhausted, and his staff is exhausted because they're 5 years in, and they are wiser, but they don't have the momentum of coming out of typically a more dominating re-election. Most incumbents, not all, but most reelected incumbents get a smaller victory the second time. Why is this president different? Number one, he was out for 4 years and had 4 years to think about all this and to formulate policy and to think about what he did wrong the first time from his point of view. They've also rested because although some of them have been through a campaign, they haven't governed for 4 years. And he won, he won the popular vote this time. He didn't last time. So arguably, he's got a greater mandate than he did the first time. All of those things, I think, open the possibility to some pretty radical change. And I'm using radical in a neutral way, just fundamental about changing the nature of the federal government. And we've seen some of this talked about, not just tariffs and deportations, but changing the nature of the federal government, appointment of more judges to dominate that branch. There could be some very big changes here. And as long as the Democrats remain divided, more difficult for them to do anything to stop it.
Okay, what about the Jewish vote?
Come in on election night, 80-20 for Harris. That Trump would have been walking around for a year saying, you're crazy if you vote for a Democrat, and I'm the best friend Israel has ever had, and any Jew who votes for them should have their head examined. And people are going, oh, no, you can't say that. You know, even we said that. Like, don't say that. That's not the right way to talk about
it. He said Israel won't exist. I mean, that was a little
I know. He said Israel won't exist, whatever. But we don't really know how this is going to shake out because it's very hard to extract the data properly. But the argument that I made in June that polling was showing the possibility that the Jewish vote could make a measurable difference in the state of Pennsylvania now apparently has the virtue of having been somewhat true. An Orthodox Union exit poll showed the Jewish vote in Pennsylvania being 48-41 for Kamala. That was a doubling of Trump's Jewish vote in the state between 2020 and 2024. Now he won. I think it's going to end up being 1.5 or 2 points in Pennsylvania. So it's not like that turned the tide, right? But everywhere that Jewish Americans voted, the vote for Trump close either went up by a third and possibly by about 50% when they actually get to the precinct by precinct counts of exclusively Jewish precincts. I bring this up to say that imagine that none of that had happened and that Trump is talking on Thursday and Friday about who he wants for his cabinet. He picks 3 openly, conservatively Zionist people in these 3 of the 4 major foreign policy jobs. Would that have happened with an 80-20 Jewish vote for Harris? Maybe, but maybe not. Trump is very transactional, and he may think that even though he didn't get every Jew to vote for him and all of that, that the Jewish community delivered for him, or that he has made a change in American politics, not only among Latinos, which partially explains the Rubio pick, by the way, which we haven't even mentioned, is that he has now elevated a Cuban to the highest, job in outside the president and vice president, really, in the United States. And there will be a lot of pride among those who feel that way.
Deservedly so. And also, with Rubio as Secretary of State, the shift toward the Western Hemisphere as a focus of American policy. Venezuela and Cuba.
Yeah.
Will be real. I mean, some of the headlines coming out of Cuba in the past month have just been horrifying. I mean, the power is out.
Yeah.
Degradation of the rule of law, that the Communist Party clique is still running things. Awful.
Maduro just stole his second election in a row.
Maduro in Venezuela. I mean, so I think, it's funny because when Bolton was national security advisor for Trump, he came up with this concept of the triangle of terror, I think is what he...
That's why when I wrote about this before the election, I mentioned there's a liberal Catholic writer, Michael Sean Winters, who says that, for the Catholic vote, which doesn't really exist anymore because the Catholic vote has become so reflective of America, the American vote at large. He said you have to distinguish between the Catholic vote and Catholic votes. And in this election, I think that's what we've seen with the Jewish community. There are she's going to win the Jewish vote.
Right. The strongest identifying Jews, the Orthodox Jews, are overwhelmingly on the side of Donald Trump. Most Jews in America are not particularly dedicated to their Jewish identity. All right. They have a lot of other things going on. It's not a criticism of them, but Orthodox Jews solidly behind Donald Trump. The more involved you are in Jewish life, the more dedicated you are to Torah, the more dedicated you are to the Jewish people, to Israel, right? The more likely you are to support Donald Trump.
Nationally, still, he didn't flip the Jews, but in Pennsylvania, where it mattered, in New York, where there's a concentration of Jews who care deeply about this, in places where it was about the Jewish vote and not just Jewish votes, there was a change.
Abe Foxman, former head of the Anti-Defamation League, when asked why, as the head of the Anti-Defamation League, his views did not more precisely reflect the opinions of the Jewish American community based on polling on social issues, why he didn't speak out about abortion and this and that, and what was his thing? And he said, I represent Jews who care about Jewish issues. I represent the Jews who care. That is what the Anti-Defamation League is about. So your formulation...
Ironically, the Jews who really care about Judaism don't care about anti-Semitism or fighting anti-Semitism. There's no commandment in the Torah to fight anti-Semitism. So the Anti-Defamation League that Abe Foxman headed up for decades is ironically for Jews who don't care very much about leading a Jewish life, but still want to feel Jewish. So they make up this stupid cause of fighting anti-Semitism.
Is exactly right. And Trump is transactional. So when he said, why am I wasting political capital on this community that is among the leaders in talking about me as though I am a devil, he was not wrong. Like, he wasn't.
Now, there's horrible news out of the Trump transition. Pete Hegseth has been named as the candidate to head the Defense Department. Pete Hegseth, Fox News host, was campaigning for all sorts of horrible people in the U.S. Defense Army and Marines who committed awful war crimes for Trump to just pardon them. You should watch the documentary on Eddie Gallagher or read the book on Eddie Gallagher. He was just gratuitously, needlessly shooting Iraqi civilians. Pete Hegseth was campaigning for Trump to pardon him. Pete Hegseth is just an awful, awful choice to be Secretary of Defense. This is horrible.
That our own Pete Hegseth will be his Secretary of Defense. Pete, of course, has been a host here at Fox for a number of years. He's an Army veteran where he served in Afghanistan, in Iraq. Trump saying, quote, Pete has spent his entire life as a warrior for the troops and for the country. He's tough, smart, and a true believer in America first. With Pete at the helm, America's enemies are on notice. Our military will be great again, and America will never back down. Wow.
I think that's an awful choice. Oh, it just fills me with revulsion when you see the dishonest campaign that he ran to have all these members of the American military who intentionally, gratuitously, needlessly were taking the time and the precision to just unnecessarily slaughter civilians in Iraq. And he went to bat for them to just get them off. He's an awful choice. I guess because he is photogenic. That's why Trump picked him. Ugh, I am just filled with loathing. And if you read the book about Eddie Gallagher, right, a Marine who just went off and just started slaughtering Iraqi civilians, putting his fellow troops in danger, right? Read the book or watch the HBO documentary on Eddie Gallagher, and you'll see the role that Pete Hegseth played in getting Trump to effectively pardon him for his needless slaughter. This is an awful choice.
I've had conversations with some people today about the prospect that Donald Trump will reach out to Democrats on some issues in order to get things passed, but also to take advantage of and try to consolidate some of the gains he made with the so-called coalition of the ascendant, the Obama coalition, younger voters, non-white voters. And we'll see where the Democrats can end up. All right, I'm going to have a few more things to say, but I want to get Zach Karabel in to talk about the economy. I want to get to your questions before too long. So if you'd like to get in a question and you're on the two-way platform, please raise your hand. Letter that somebody sent to me. I don't normally read the hard copy of anything anymore. I'd like to, but I don't. And I don't almost ever read the letter section of anything, like reading the comments. Like, life's too short. But one of you sent me a letter that was in the New York Times. You can put that poll, which I want to read to you. I don't know that they normally run letters like this in the New York Times. Progressive liberals, your presumption of the moral high ground, your smug and arrogant judgmental sense of elitist entitlement, your malicious hate, envy, name-calling, and abusive persecution of your opponents through the use of the media and the justice system have all been rejected by the American people. It wasn't just the economy or the border or crime or the international disaster you created through your weakness. nor the wokeness you've used to silence those who disagree with your liberal agenda. It was so much more than that. It was the sense of fairness that run deep in all Americans and the desire for freedom and justice. You have been rejected, and you have a lot of work to do to ever be relevant again. Signed, Charles Michael Sidero of Ormond Beach, Florida. Lori Blackford, please book that.
Okay, here's how the New York Times covers Pete Hegseth's nomination. Hegseth is likely to run into opposition from senior military officials and lawmakers who have served in the military because Hegseth has embraced narratives by troops who ran afoul of military justice rules. Former Pentagon official from Trump's first term questions Hegseth's lack of experience, right? Raised concerns about his ability to win at Senate confirmation, even with a Republican majority. I agree. I think he is an awful, awful choice. Right. How will Trump affect the economy?
Whose inclination is going to be to cut taxes and not cut spending nearly as much as taxes are cut. And while there may be some interest in dealing with the Social Security issues, the willingness to do so politically has, at least to date, proven to be non-existent. Really easy to fulminate against, oh my God, we got to do something about Social Security, Medicare, very hard to go back to your constituents.
Less than non-existent.
So bond markets are basically saying this is going to be a spend, 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 very much unlike a typical Republican administration of the past. And you're also going to get tariffs, which, contrary to what Donald Trump, I believe, believes himself, I do think Trump, in good faith, is just simply economically wrong about tariffs. That doesn't make it excusable. It just means tariffs are paid for by the person or the company importing the goods, not by the country or the company exporting the goods. That is not a debatable, subjective statement. That's just literally how tariffs are collected. And that is, if it happens at any broad scale, going to be a cost that is going to be borne because it will likely be passed on by companies to consumers by American voters, citizens.
Let me ask you, the way we do in pop music.
We just have a lot more money. So we have a comparative advantage of more money. So if more Americans invest in more crypto, the net effect of that globally is crypto goes up, right? Just because we have more money.
Two other things that Donald Trump would say have American businesses and markets excited. One is more deregulation. One is more energy production. Are those two things that could help the economy in a material way?
I am sorry to say, and you can all flame me and shout at me, energy production policy matters almost not at all to energy production. Under Trump 2018 to 2020, permits on offshore drilling were handed out like candy, and there was no more offshore drilling. Like, oil companies are going to extract oil domestically based on demand for oil globally. That's the only reason. So it doesn't
respond to price. But what about doing things like building pipelines?
The fact is, our energy intensivity is going down. I mean, who's the largest wind producer in the United States? You know the answer to this. Texas. Texas is like the Saudi Arabia of wind, and it's a good energy source. So, like, Americans are embracing all sorts of renewables because they're a good source of energy, and we've got a lot of different. We've got a lot of sun and we got a lot of wind. It's a big country, and the price of oil is not going up, and what's going on in the Middle East isn't going to change that. I mean, even if Israel bombed all of Iran's refineries, it wouldn't really matter in the sense of it doesn't change the equation radically.
All right. What about deregulation?
Deregulation clearly is a positive thing, but getting it done is look. I am fascinated to see if the Trump administration is able to sort of do a game of chicken, really break the regulatory logjam. Because the fact is, there is a process to create rules in the bureaucracy, and there's a process to remove rules. And they are both incredibly arduous and incredibly slow. It is very hard. I mean, you know this better than anyone. It's really hard to deregulate. It's very hard to remove a rule. You can probably instruct some of the bureaucracy to not enforce certain rules or to enforce them more loosely. That's not really deregulation any more than it's more like the equivalent of decriminalization of drug confidence in him. Back to your point about who's being appointed right now, I'm actually struck by the fact that these are all incredibly hardline people, but they're all professionals, right?
Yeah.
If Kash Patel had been appointed to be the
Pete Hegseth, not a professional,
director of the CIA, which would have been a ludicrous appointment just in terms of experience and time, and probably wouldn't have even gotten through a Senate that was compliant, we'd be having a different discussion. These are all people who can credibly execute and understand policy, right? They get how the world works. I mean, and that's actually that's very different than the first term, right? I mean, Rex Tillerson had no business being Secretary of State.
Well, there were some people who were credentialed.
There were.
I think some of these.
I want to ask your view about what do you think it's plausible that Tulsi Gabbard could get appointed?
I wish that Tulsi Gabbard had been nominated for SecDef.
I'm a fan of hers. I think she's courageous and charismatic, though obviously she's never administered a big organization before.
Yeah. I think she could get a job at the NSC in a senior role, maybe a counselor to the president, maybe money. I think it's one of the big unanswered questions. I ask people in politics about it all the time. Why are Democrats better raising money online? It's true that WinRed started later than ActBlue. And for those of you who don't know, these are the main excuse me, online portals used by the two sides to raise small dollar contributions. And the example I always give is Jimmy Harrison, who's the chair of the DNC now, ran against Lindsey Graham for Senate in South Carolina, complete long shot, and he raised like more than $100 million, mostly online, more than like most Republican presidential candidates raise online. There's no obvious reason why they're better at it just because their platform started earlier. Republicans just haven't figured it out. They used to be better than Democrats at raising small dollar donations in the pre-digital age through direct mail. So when you say WinRed catch up to ActBlue, I think you're asking about what an impact it would have. I'm saying usually you imagine the money's helpful, particularly in down ballot races, and it's a sign of grassroots strength. I think there's a real puzzle to be solved, which I haven't heard anybody talk about, let alone solve. How did Kamala Harris have so much grassroots strength that she broke records in raising small dollar contributions, but that did not translate to turning out the vote? To the contrary, that doesn't really make sense to me. It's part of why I thought she might win because of.
But Republicans would have won a lot more seats in the House of Representatives and in the U.S. Senate if they'd had more money.
All that grassroots support. If Republicans had more money, particularly down ballot races, they would do better. They lost some of those Senate races, I think, because their candidates were outspent. The only Republican who won a Senate race in one of the battleground presidential states was Dave McCormick, who I think had more money because of his own personal wealth, but also he had a very well-funded super PAC. The other ones, I don't know the final numbers, but I think most of them were outspent. Same with the House races, where Democratic House candidates had a lot more money. So the answer to your question is, I think clearly they would do better if they raised more. But the more interesting question to me is, why aren't they able to raise as much?
On the chat, we're asking to speak about the Chevron decision overturning it, how that's going to affect deregulation. So
thank you for reading the chat. I never do. Please address it.
Well, there you go. I think there's a misconception that Chevron throws out regulations. What it does is it removes the presumption that agencies that determine how statutes get implemented and get to kind of fill in the blanks of legislative language, there will no longer be deference to those agencies by default, which means that companies can challenge how the EPA or the FDA interpret those regulations in court and will be kind of adjudicated by judges as to whether or not those challenges appear to be fair. So it doesn't actually create any kind of immediate or easy pathway to deregulation. It creates an immediate and easy pathway to challenge how various agencies have implemented legislation in regulations. I'm not trying to be convoluted here. It's not a magic wand of now the government can itself use Chevron. It actually allows for challenges, but it's not like the Trump administration can come in and wave the flag of the Loper decision and say this allows us to remove regulations. That's not how the decision works, and it's not how it can play out legally. So if you're hoping that this is now like, wow, we can all just go ignore environmental assessment reviews because we think the EPA has overstretched its authority based on an interpretation of some statute, it will definitely allow an oil company or any company to challenge that and be heard in court in a different way. And I'm sure
the policies. Well, what I really came on here to say is that we have a transgender son who is a married guy with beautiful children. And
right, so this woman's a Democrat, her husband's a Republican.
We're scared for him because that ad that Trump.
So the supposition behind what she's saying is that it is society that must bend and accommodate her transgender son. Why doesn't her trans son have to bend and accommodate to society? The natural normal human inclination is to be thoroughly disturbed by the transgender. Why is it the society that has to change to accommodate a tiny, tiny, tiny proportion of the population that chooses to take on an identity that is incredibly disturbing for the overwhelming majority of people?
Trump very smartly ran was like the Willie Horton ad. That was it. I mean, I'm sure that it, not only in Pennsylvania, but many other states, when you saw that ad, if you were somebody that was not understanding of a transgender person, I mean, I'm not even for funding of that whole thing is just made me even go, whoa, that's just not, not good. But what it did is it dehumanized somebody like my son and made them just, somebody to be feared, and it mischaracterizes a lot of transgender people and makes them.
The natural normal human inclination is to want to sort people into male and female. And if you start playing around with normal, natural ways of being human, you're going to elicit a really negative response. I don't want trans people hurt. but it's shocking and appalling to most people.
Makes people afraid to be in a bathroom with them. That's the bottom.
Yeah. Yeah. People, when they go to the bathroom, they don't want a member of the opposite sex in the bathroom with them. Right? You can't choose your sex. All you can do is mutilate yourself, and then to go use the bathroom that happens to align with what you imagine is your new gender identity. People rightly, naturally are going to be upset.
Line. And transgenderism has nothing to do with sex and sexuality. It's their gender. And so there's a lot of education that's going to have to go on in this.
Why isn't it the transgendered who need to be educated about how disturbing they are for many other people? Why is it that society must be educated and browbeat into accepting this as normal to have men in women's bathrooms?
Country to help people that are transgender just not to be feared. And the sports thing is a very valid thing. I don't believe that transgender males should be in women's sports. So it's so complicated. But
why is it just the supposition that it's society that has to be educated? I don't buy that.
And look, I'm dual citizen of Australia and Texas. I grew up in Texas. I sound like I grew up in Texas. And I live in Sydney, but I'm from a small East Texas community. My daughter went to school her last years here and then went to the university here. And so the contrast of those, and then helping asylum seekers in Australia, and then coming here and seeing, the school that my daughter went to is a majority minority school. And this county went 80% Trump. And I just looking at the policies and putting the rhetoric aside, Trump's immigration policy looks more compassionate to me, particularly coming from Australia and seeing how Australia has handled their immigration policy. And so I just want to put that out there, that I want immigration fixed for I think it causes chaos throughout Latin America at the moment. And so that's really important to me. But I hate that I'm considered a bigot, because I want that solved for the immigrants that I know, both here and then again, like I said, we know lots of immigrants in Australia, and it just seems like a fair system over there. And it seems like that's what Trump is aiming for. When you listen and put aside the rhetoric, put aside the fact that he's been told by people on the border to say nothing about immigration and all of that. So sorry, that's what I've come here to say.
No need to apologize. Like that's
most Americans, because I think the way the media frames it is one thing. It's most people see it in a very different way. It's not. If you care about kids and humanity, then watching women and children get trafficked over the border is not something that we should be for. And so they love to highlight certain aspects of it. But if you care about protecting children, the trafficking of women, the fentanyl that's coming into the country, then a secure border isn't just about getting people in and out. It's about making sure that we do it in a lawful and orderly way that makes sense for our country, but also that protects people.
Dan.
Leslie, forgive me for not knowing. How does Australia do it? You say that what Trump's proposing is significantly more humane and better.
Yeah, look, Australia kind of went through something like this on a smaller scale. I get that it's an island nation. I mean, I've lived there for 20 years. I know it's an island. But in 2006, 2007, they decided that not allowing people to arrive by boat was inhumane. And so they rescinded that policy. They had a no boats policy, which sounds a lot like the Remain in Mexico policy, kind of similar. And like 1,000 people drowned. And because Australia has compulsory voting, which, again, different topic, but the Rudd, who was the Labour Party candidate, quickly reversed policy, like within 6 months to a year. And now both sides are on board. Nobody arrives by boat to Australia, basically. Every once in a while, a boat arrives. They're quickly, processed offshore. And so no one comes. Cartels cannot bring people to Australia. And everybody's on the same boat. That's one thing. Birthright citizenship, they've rescinded that. That means that, women are not being raped and being told, hey, if you're pregnant, you'll have more of a chance to stay as a citizen here in Australia because you'll have a child here. I'm not seeing like the propositioning of women because men want to have a child here in Australia, in the US. I'm actually in the US at the moment. The relationships where you feel like the man is trying to have a child here in the US so that he can stay here and be the father of a citizen. We had to pay for our kids to attend public school in Australia, and we had to pay for healthcare to go over there, but we attained permanent residency within 3 years, which I think is actually very quick, and then citizenship within 5. And I think until you get this border policy done, you cannot fix the other end, which is allowing a path to, look, I don't think illegal residents should be able to have a path to citizenship, although some sort of amnesty could be on board.
Yeah.
Everybody that I talk to is like that. Everybody but particularly in this area, there's more intermarriages than in the 90s. There's more people that are, it's a majority minority town. No one wants to see people get deported that are law-abiding citizens that have been here for years.
Bring up has been happening since the Republic was founded. People reward their friends, and those who are not their friends often don't have their calls returned unless they need something from them. And so, to Sean's point, you'll populate where you can. You want your allies. You want people who are going to execute what you want to do. And those who don't, this is what Bill Clinton and Barack Obama did the same exact thing.
Yeah, there was a lot of tension between Bush and Trent Lott's appointment. They definitely had different views on how to privatize government.
Okay, who will Donald Trump pick as his attorney general? Mark Halperin's perspective.
I think that a certain kind of attorney general could do that. So I really hope he picks somebody who they don't have to be establishment or not change anything, but I hope they'll have respect for the rule of law and the independence of the Justice Department. I don't believe that Donald Trump will try to, or if he does, it'll get away with having his political opponents prosecuted. I just don't believe that will happen, no matter who
he's bigger than that also.
Yeah, I just don't believe he will. But I don't have a strong feeling about who it will be. But one of the things about President Trump is he's more of a student of history than he's normally given credit for. And he's familiar with how John and Bobby Kennedy ran the White House Justice Department combo. He's familiar with how Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon dealt with the Justice Department. And unfortunately, I think his attitude is, I'm not going to be the sucker president who doesn't take at least as much advantage as my predecessors did of the power of this office. And I hope he doesn't do that with the Justice Department in a way that, again, doesn't respect the rule of law. I'm watching close.
Okay, Seth Moulton, Democratic congressman, got in trouble in some quarters for what he says about the whole trans thing.
Democrats are certainly grappling with the way forward. And after the loss Tuesday, you are one of the lawmakers who've said that Democrats are out of touch with the American people, saying they spend way too much time trying not to offend anyone rather than being brutally honest about the challenges many Americans face. Then as part of that argument, you told the New York Times, quote, I have 2 little girls. I don't want them getting run over on a playing field by a male or formerly male athlete. But as a Democrat, I'm supposed to be afraid to say that. I know that you have put out a follow-up statement. I do want to give you a chance to explain your comments because you know they have faced backlash. So you've got the floor.
Sure. No, thank you, Alex, very much. And look, I was just speaking authentically as a dad about one of many issues where I think we're just out of touch with the majority of voters. And I stand by my position. Maybe I didn't get all the words exactly right. But the point is that the backlash I've received proves my point that we can't even have these discussions as a party. The chairman of the Massachusetts Democratic Party wouldn't even return my phone call. And we've got to be able to have these debates. But instead, we have a wing of our party that shames us, that tries to cancel people who even bring up these difficult topics, and frankly, shames voters. This is the same group of people who told us to defund the police, who told us that there wasn't a problem at the southern border, who told us that inflation was transient, whatever that means, and who told us that Biden was just fine. And they're out of touch with voters. If we just listen to voters on all of these issues, they were telling us the truth. So we've got to be willing to have these debates. I'm willing to have my mind changed. In fact, I've had some really good conversations in just the last few days with LGBTQ advocates and others, some of whom agree with me, others who don't, but are willing to engage in a thoughtful discussion rather than just trying to cancel one person or another.
Yeah, good on this bloke for speaking out. All right, this guy is interesting. Musa Al-Gharbi, Democrats must stop shaming voters.
People on the left love of shaming and patronizing. Every time people do that, they create more Republicans. They create people who are more likely to vote Republican.
All right. thoughtful intellectual on the
about what
left.
Democrats did wrong as what
when Bill Clinton improved upon Michael Dukakis's performance in 49 states, plus the District of Columbia. The bottom line is, no matter where you looked on the map, Kate Baldwin, no matter where you looked, Donald Trump was improving on where he did 4 years ago, except for Washington State. It is no wonder that at this particular point, he looks like he's going to be the first Republican to win the popular vote since George W. Bush back in 2004.
Now, today's guest literally wrote the book on the left's drift of so-called wokeness. Would he have experienced some of
to also be inclusive and humane and so on? So like 2016, Bernie Sanders would probably have done pretty well, would have probably outperformed Kamala Harris, I think, in part because he actually had consistently more appeal with normie voters than Kamala did. But, 2020 Bernie Sanders, who moved on a lot of these issues, and as you said, kind of lead into more woke stuff in a bid to win the Democratic primary and respond to some of the challenges he faced in the previous cycle about being insufficiently concerned about identitarian issues. The thing about it is that Kamala's performance with a lot of demographics was so weak that almost anyone probably would have done marginally better, including possibly Joe Biden. Although, Joe Biden is tough because actually Democrats' numbers went up when Kamala was on the ballot. Without the switch, Democrats probably would have lost hardcore, not because people disagreed with Joe Biden's politics. I think Joe Biden's politics, his actual, were a little bit closer to normies, although they were dissatisfied. I mean, his administration was super woke. And even when he ran in 2020, if you did a drinking game every time Joe Biden said systemic racism, good luck to your liver. But the main problem that Joe Biden had is just that he was demented, and he seemed like old, like suffering dementia, and seemed to be just incapable of governing. And so Joe Biden was a real problem for the Democrats. When he stepped down, their prospects did improve. The problem is they were digging themselves out from such a place, and Kamala was just a really weak candidate to replace him. So I think he needed to be replaced. But Kamala was not the right person to replace him.
Barry Weiss went on Fox News after the election and was talking about sort of the trans issue and this broader question of wokeness. And I saw a lot of leftists kind of dunking on that and saying, listen, Kamala Harris didn't run on wokeness. She wasn't out there talking about trans issues all the time. Of course, the Trump administration ran heavily. Actually, they ran those kind of now famous they-them ads about Kamala Harris's position on the issue. She did have pronouns in her Twitter bio, still does, last I checked. So is there any truth to that she was actually running a lot of ads on the economy? She did.
Issue is that Kamala has a long record of being one of the most culturally progressive members of Congress, and there's tons of clips of Kamala just both in the 2020 campaign and in other contexts, striking really woke positions. In fact, there's a great clip of Kamala saying wokeness is great, everyone should be woke, more people should be woke, and so on and so forth. So you can just play a lot of Kamala clips, and the fact that she was attempting to downplay or migrate her previous positions. One reason she wasn't able to do that effectively is she didn't actually take many contemporary positions. She was, when asked, what would you do about?
Yeah, she was just vague. Well, this guy wrote an incredibly thoughtful essay on his Substack, A Graveyard of Bad Election Narratives, all the prominent but obviously false narratives about the 2024 election prepared for burial in one convenient post. And he just knocks it out of the park. Racism, not so much. GOP has been doing worse with white voters for every single cycle that Trump has been on the ballot. And there's tons of evidence that Trump's racialized language has been a major driver of this trend. It's been a drag on his support among whites rather than serving as a key to his success. Democrats have been bleeding non-white voters in every midterm and general election since 2010. Democrats' gains in 2018 driven by whites. The red wave that never materialized in 2022, thank the whites. Kamala never enjoyed strong support with black people. In 2024, Democrats had their lowest performance with black voters in half a century. Black people across the board were lukewarm on Harris, and not just black dudes. Sexism. Trump did better in this cycle with men than in any of his previous campaigns, but his 55% vote share among men was hardly unprecedented. Republicans Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, and George W. Bush all captured the same share of the male vote or higher. Right? The voting patterns of men and women were not that different in this election. Whoever got the lion's share of the male vote tended to win the female vote too. That's how it was traditionally. This changed after 1996. wasn't because men suddenly became more Republican. It changed because women shifted aggressively towards the Democratic Party in the mid-1990s and consistently gave Democrats 54% of their vote for every cycle since, irrespective of who was at the top of the ticket or what the pressing issues of the day were. And other dumb explanations that he absolutely demolishes. Revolt of the elites. So 50 billionaires threw their weight behind Trump, but far more billionaires, 83, supported the Democratic nominee. And in terms of money raised, the Democrats brought in about twice as much money as the Republicans. Harris was the clear choice for voters with six-figure salaries or higher. Trump won with people earning less than $50,000 a year. Democrats performed better with rich Americans than with any other voting bloc. Turnout troubles, right? So Democrats had fewer votes this time, but this analysis is deeply misguided. Overall turnout down slightly from 2020, but this was not the case in the states that decided the election. Pennsylvania, Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan all had record voter turnout. They had more folks cast ballots in 2024 than the last round, and Harris lost all of these swing states nonetheless. Right? The decrease in turnout was in safe states, where it was obvious that one party was going to win. Right? Low propensity voters have increasingly drifted towards the Republican Party. High propensity voters shifted the other way. So Democrats have been increasingly overperforming relative to polls in races where turnout is low, such as midterms and special elections. High turnout races see Republicans do better than polling predicts. And then there is an essay about a cliche that is true. Yes, it's a cliche, Sydney Morning Herald, but an overseas holiday unlocked a new me. You feel different in different places. And so this woman went on a holiday to Tokyo, and a few days into the trip, one of the friends I was with commented he loved this new version of me. At home, I'd leave parties early. I was just completely focused on work. This time, not so much. I was a completely new version of myself. I thought of myself as a person who had to live alone. Here I was sharing a tiny Airbnb with 3 friends, devoid of drama. Here I was, the Uber organizer, and I was letting other people plan the route, not freaking out if we got on the wrong train. It was a joy to find that I could still adapt and shift to my environment. I'm back home now, but you change your place, right? You'll not just necessarily change your luck, but you'll feel completely different in a new place, right? You do get to discover a new me when you go to a new place. All right, Kip, what's going on, man?
Hey, how you doing tonight?
I'm good.
Your guy earlier, I don't know, about 5 minutes ago, that guy that kept reeling off all those things that the media had been bullshitting us about. That was a real good pickup you had there. You know, the plasticity of reality and the way the media manipulates it. I think we're at a real impasse. I don't know if you've picked up on this, because the transgenders, they don't want to give up an inch. The blacks and browns don't want to give up an inch. Sonny Hostin's not giving up an inch. ABC News is not giving up their version of reality. You get what I'm saying? There's these conflicting narratives. It gets me wondering about things like the freedom of the press, because you always hear with all freedoms comes great responsibilities. What is their responsibility? How do we hold them to the fire? I know you know a lot about this subject. Lay it on me, Look Forward, please.
Well, they're a business, and if they are out of touch with your reality, you're not going to watch them. So I don't think we need to add new regulation. I don't think we need to go on a war. I mean, MSNBC is being sold because it's no longer profitable. Its ratings are crashing. If the news media is not meeting the needs of their consumers, their customers, then they go out of business, or they have increasingly less influence. People are increasingly turning to podcasts and independent media such as Substack to learn about the world rather than the mainstream media. And so we can just allow this direction to continue. People are increasingly switching off the network news and increasingly turning to shows like this.
From Trayvon Martin to George Floyd, we saw how they showed the plight of Black men in the hands of police, unarmed. Those unicorns, they collected up a bunch of unicorns to the point to where 160, 170 cities, even cities the size of Kenosha, started burning. It was their portrayal. It was their lack of objectivity exclusively that caused that. But no. the media would blame the cops, but you and I know that's not true.
No, but it wasn't the media that drove people to loot and burn. The media provided a spark, but we have a substantial portion of our population that is just itching to get out there and loot and burn and rape. And so the media provided a spark, but if they'd done this among a Scandinavian population, we wouldn't have had widespread rioting. That there is a subset of our urban population that loves to commit crime. And when the media and our elites develop this narrative that encouraged police to stop doing their job, then this lawless urban subsection of our population, young men, was unleashed to do awful, awful things. But if we didn't have that subsection of our population that was so dedicated to raping and murdering and looting, all right, all the media in the world would not have caused, honorable people to go out there and loot. It's just the media lit a spark and unleashed the thugs among us.
Mr. Luke Ford, I appreciate your opinions, but I do think that in situations like Trump, for example, I believe the media's portrayal of him caused those 2 or 3 assassination attempts. Hell, he wasn't even president. Has that ever happened before? A, have they ever given anybody such negative media attention? And B, has there ever been multiple assassination attempts on somebody that ain't even the president yet?
Well, there was George Wallace was shot in circa 1968. We had two different shooting incidents at President Gerald Ford, and we don't have any evidence yet, to the best of my knowledge, why the first shooter took a shot at Donald Trump. So I don't think we can state for sure that the media tipped these assassination attempts. I think we need to find out more. The second guy, he was a committed leftist. He had a strong ideological agenda. So maybe the media played a role, maybe it didn't. I'm not sure.
Okay, I get what you're saying in the world of CNN and Fox and MSNBC, bro. I really do. But I think that because they have those, I thought there was something awesome about them, ABC and NBC and CBS having those, being able to broadcast over the air. I thought that came with some strange level of hey, we got to do right. We got to keep everything 100. And I figured we got some way to hold their feet to the fire, because at this point, it's obvious that they're trying to subvert the will of the people. Yes or no?
I just think they have a different hero system, all right? They just experience reality differently. So are they trying to subvert the will of the people? I mean, Democrats, I mean, you would expect everyone to try to fulfill their own system of what's heroic. And so
right.
If I don't accept Jesus Christ as my savior, am I trying to subvert Christianity, or am I living out a different hero system?
I don't know all the rules, but you better not be picking up sticks on a Sunday, because they will fucking get you. But no, I don't know, because with me, the media, I keep thinking back to that strange looking dude that works in the British Museum of Natural History, because 5 years ago, when I thought of things like magical spells and incantations and talismans and amulets, it seems far out. I mean, you know what I mean? It just seems far out. My brain doesn't even want to accept ideas like that, because I'm not I associate it with fantasy, unrealness or whatever. And people think of that stuff like it faded away a long time ago. But in Babylon, It's written about on most of those tablets that they have in that British Museum. So it was a big part of the thinking. And what I think is people don't realize that we're bombarded with something akin to magical spells and incantations. And they sell us the, politicians and hamburgers and Uncle Ted's surrogate activities. They sell it all. You know what I mean? They sell it all. And it's no different. Those are spells and incantations. If it makes people mad enough to go out there and try to kill Trump, it's a pretty good fucking spell, You saw how it poisons people like Sam Harris, who otherwise are pretty rational thinkers, they can just be poisoned. And poor Sam, he thinks he's coming up with all this stuff in his own head. He don't realize that the well that his mind is drinking from is poisoned. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think Sam Harris simply experiences reality differently from us. So I don't think that Sam Harris is being manipulated by the media around him. He just has a different hero system than we do. So I just don't buy into people being that gullible. They take what they want and they leave the rest.
Mm-hmm. Well, that COVID stuff, I know you feel like you were on, maybe, I don't know, maybe you feel like you might be on the right side of the history, but on the wrong side of your side of the aisle on that. But that was a good, to me, a good example of them trying to give you right think messaging. You know what I'm saying? And it doesn't work any different. Whether it's a slogan or any other kind of propaganda or whatever, we're so vulnerable to that. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Well, how come you're not vulnerable to it? Are you just so much smarter than 99% of the population?
No, I can't say that I was made impervious. I told you last time we talked that, I can be taken in by other things, like leaving a legacy for my kids. You get what I'm saying? So it's the things, I guess I'm on guard for more than the average bear, but that doesn't make me impervious. You get what I'm saying? It doesn't make me completely impervious because you can get taken in by other things, other things. And I was going to also mention to you tonight that, I never had a brother. You said you had a brother and a sister. Didn't I catch that from you?
Yes.
Okay. I never had a brother, but I noticed how brothers can become rivals, and it drives them to achieve 10 times what they would have achieved without that rivalry. Be it friendly. I'm not necessarily saying they're sometimes they're good rivalries. And you look at one brother and he's got 22 businesses, and the other brother, he's only got 12 businesses, but he's the damn mayor. You know what I'm saying? And it's like they drove each other to this, and I don't even think they realize it, And this is a vital element that I think helped Europe, if you want to say strangle the whole planet. All those little duchies and kingdoms made each other devote so much of their time and energy towards just achievement and, I don't know, power acquisition or whatever. And I think America, we benefited from our brotherly rivalry with Russia, because I told you the rest of the planet went broke during the course of World War I and World War II, and you got what's left standing was America and Russia. And when it fell in 1989, it seems like that's when we seem to lose that hard edge. I probably feel like Oswald Spengler, that we screwed up a long time ago, around about the time we were giving women the right to vote and some of those things in the early 1900s, we had kind of crossed the line. But what had kept us maybe still number one, with that hard edge might have been that brotherly rivalry that we had with Russia, because you remember, nobody wants to point it out, but they did score some early victories throwing this and that and the other into space. You remember during the...
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't alive, but I've read enough books about the 1950s and how the Russia got ahead. It's true in personal life too. The easiest way to quickly bond with someone is to gossip about how awful someone else is. And so having a rival such as the Soviet Union, it acts as a cohesive force in our country.
You know, you and I'm gonna do a Trump weave, but you and Elliot the other day was talking about like first things you remembered, and I was surprised you didn't remember Man on the Moon. You know what I mean? But I guess you were just too little.
I was
and then
3. I don't remember it.
And I also was wondering. I don't think y'all named 1976 in Berlin when those didn't some Israelis get taken
That's
hostage?
1972. 72. They got slaughtered.
Munich. That was Munich, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Still too young? You were still too young for that?
Still too young. The first news event that I remember currently is when I was 7, and it was the Yom Kippur War. I'm just not sure I remember news events before that.
And you didn't live in America in 1976, but they made a big damn deal about America in 1976 and that 200-year.
Yeah, I remember that because I was then 10 years of age. So I remember the 200th anniversary of the United States. I remember that, but it was 1973.
Everything was all painted up red, white, and blue then. I just remember you got here in 77, so I didn't know if there was still vestiges of that around, but they made a big damn deal about that. And then y'all did remember the 442 days with the Iran hostages or whatever. That apparently made a big impression. But so I just thought that was interesting. You know what I remember about the 70s? When I think about the 70s, everything was shaggy. The carpet, the women's bush, everything was shaggy. Did you not notice how scraggly and shaggy everything was from the 70s? It hadn't really repaired from when we lost our mind in the 60s. Everything was still all shaggy and a little bit discombobulated in the 70s. Can you
I remember that, but I didn't see a woman's bush in real life until 1989 when I was 22.
Damn Desmond for not having a stack of Playboys where you could see.
Oh no, I saw them. I saw it in porn from like age 7, but in my own bush to play with, I was 22.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I still, from time to time, when you're on this thing talking and I'm in there listening, I just wonder, would Luke lose his mind if we ever just rented him a stripper and crushed up like about 3 Adderalls and gave him a straw and he just snorted and had his way? Would he ever come back, or would he just be lost forever? Would it be an experience, or would he just be lost forever? But anyway, back to Russia. I feel like in '89. I feel like since then, the art wilted and the movies got worse and our institutions started to get that creep of that political correctness. Remember, it wasn't called woke then. It was called political correctness. And sort of those soulless HR gianocracies began to permeate the society, writ large, and the moral, ethical, creative decay was sort of, I feel like it accelerated. I feel like maybe it came on. Now you're going to say, Kip, you just got too much time on your hands, or you might say you agree with any of that. Where are you going? What do you think?
Well, there are many ways that we have declined since any point that you name, whether last year or 5 years ago or 30 years ago. And then there are some ways that we are better. So I don't side with either the decline school or the advancement school. Right. There are ways that we're better and there are ways that we're worse.
I think you weren't talking to me, but was it you that said that you hate the comparison of us as a late Soviet?
To compare America in 2024 with the Soviet Union in 1988, I think that's a ridiculous comparison.
You remember the dude with the splotch on his head and the real cheap looking suits that they used to all have? And they would all have cigarettes dangling from their finger. I don't know. I think it's sort of there. I've heard also people kind of compare us to whatever Rome, like when it flipped over from like BC to AD, right there at that is it the Emporium that they call it, the beginning of the Emporium or whatever? But I've heard that as well as an example. But you don't want to believe it. You know what I mean? You want to believe others, but all things have a beginning and have an end. But yeah, have you had a chance? I sent you that thing. I know you're a JD Vance fan, so I had sent you showing you where the media portrayed JD Vance as Mr. Weird, and Tim Warnels, they portrayed him as Mr. Wonderful. And I mean, man, it was so stark. It was so stark. It's like, why can't they play it just a little bit more fair? And I get what you're saying. MSNBC, they went to the left, just like Fox went to the right. But it's those networks. I mean, it's another et tu brute. Can we not? Is there anybody? We know we can't depend on those bastards at PBS. So who can we depend on besides Luke Ford? And even you've got to run background checks on Mark Halperin and damn Megyn Kelly and all that stuff. That's a hell of a budget, man. I'm glad you got Elliot out there selling ads and all that stuff for you, but I still think it's too much for one man, and I think there should be we should be able to depend on them for some sort of objectivity, because it's just going off the rails. And I think it's created this kind of like universe now that we're living in, to where you see everybody, you're saying, well, back off of it. We had 51% of the vote. We got the mandate. You guys are full of shit. We can prove it. Look at the votes. And they're going, we're not backing off of it because you guys just got bullshitted by social media. We were listening to network TV, who was telling the truth, and you were listening to Joe Rogan, who was selling horse paste. So speak to that for me, Luke, before I get off of here, would you?
Yeah, so we can depend on the news media to follow its own interests and its own hero system. You can depend on me to follow my hero system. You can depend on other people to follow their own hero system and their own interest, all right? So it's not just purely material interest. We also have interests in what we regard as heroic, what we call the hero system. So, for example, transgender identity hurts me like a punch in the stomach, all right? It feels like a punch in the stomach. Gay marriage, that feels like a punch in the stomach to me. I would never comment on it if I was working with someone or socializing with someone who had a same-sex marriage. But as a traditional Orthodox Jew, that is not marriage. It is completely contrary to my hero system. So I think we can count on people to follow their hero system. If people go through the screening process and work in network news, we can count on them to follow a liberal hero system. If people are in their professions, you can count on them in all likelihood to follow a liberal hero system. If people are evangelical Christians, you can count on them to follow that hero system. So people follow their hero systems, people follow their interests. We can never count on anyone, because as soon as we form a relationship with someone, we are inevitably setting ourselves up for feeling betrayed, right? You can't form a relationship with anyone without setting yourself up. There's going to be something that comes along and you're going to feel betrayed, because as soon as you form a relationship, you're creating the inevitability that people will not behave in alignment with your expectations, and therefore you will then feel betrayed, right? You're not going to be able to date a woman. You're not going to form a friendship at work. You're not going to form acquaintanceships at your sports bar without feeling betrayed. So no, you can't count on anyone in the sense that you mean, but you can count on people to follow their own interests and their own hero systems. But that requires a little bit of effort to understand what's motivating people and what their hero system is and how they understand their self-interest.
Yes. Well, this incompatibility is heightened and much more dramatic because the media has no objectivity. But you've, like you said in your previous statement, don't expect objectivity. You didn't say that, but you were saying don't expect objectivity. You're asking for too much. They're not going to give it. You shouldn't expect it. So we're left to try to decipher it on our own. But I'm telling you, their lack of objectivity is what is creating this sort of dual reality that we see, because like you and I already know, there is a plasticity to reality. And even those guys that think they know everything, that get in there and start smashing those atoms, they find out that damn electron's going to do whatever it wants to do. So like I'm saying, it would make things smoother, and it would make us maybe have a happier time together if they could somehow sort of kind of keep it a little bit objective. But, you know, I guess I'm asking for too much. But thanks as always, bro.
Yeah. Take care, Kip. Yeah, you are asking for too much because people experience the world differently. It's not just that people see the world differently, they experience the world differently. People experience reality through the lens of their hero system, which overwhelmingly they inherit and don't analyze and don't think about. And so what you regard as objective is going to be quite different from someone with a different hero system. Your hero system is going to shape what you understand